to thank Evelyn and the conference, the organizers, and Unirio for this invitation. And also remember, as she did, our cooperation project coordinated by Betty Rabetti, professora. And I met Evelyn 2 years ago when I was here to teach, and I invited her last year in Italy for a wonderful cycle of conferences and lectures. And yes, I will, my abstract doesn't correspond at all, in part, only in part to my lecture. I cut some parts, some paragraphs, but I decided to leave the images, so I will not show and comment all the images. Don't worry. They are really a lot. So talking about light means talking about space. It means particularly to talk about the composition, the construction, and the conception of space, also involving the perception of the audience. The period between 1910 and 1930 is a crucial one in the history of stage lighting. In my researches, I've often considered and investigated another crucial time, that is the period between the end of the 18th century and the beginning of 19th. I say that to underline that in the history of theater and performing arts, in particular in the history of lighting in the theater, sometimes the concepts and ideas overrule the practices. That is, they anticipate them. And they have to wait a lot of time and new technical innovations to be experienced. That is to be seen and to be perceived by spectators, and in this sense to become part of a culture and of a society. I like to open my lecture with this remark because I consider the period at the beginning of 20th century as a turning point and at the same time a link between the past and future, being also an important element to of our relationship to tradition and to what we can call the tradition of the new, of the tradition of modernity, of the avant-garde. Besides, in my researches, I've always been paying great attention to the relationship between art and technique. So the premise. Since the first decade of the 20th century, a lot of ideas that have their origin in the past begin to be realized. I don't intend to mean that changes and innovations are a mere effect of technique. I would rather underline that the relations and innovations are, that the relations between new conceptions and technical devices enable a virtuous cycle, and that also techniques can trigger different ways to conceive the stage, to conceive the theater. I give some example of this alliance between art and technique. I start from an early case. It's a creation by Max Reinhardt of 1911. It's well known that one of the most important points of Reinhardt's work was the interrelationship between space and stage direction. He wanted every creation to be conceived and organized in its own space, and this space was the result of a particular choice of the stage director himself, according to dramaturgy. That's what we nowadays define dramaturgy of space. It's important that someone among his collaborators already used the term dramaturgy of light, an unusual definition for this period, for that period. In Reinhardt's work, structuring space through light amounts interpreting the text, translating it in another language. In this sense, he aimed to have the possibility to choose among different theaters, and in a similar way, he looked for a great variety of lighting devices, so to choose the most correspondent to his idea of the direction of dramaturgy. We can also remind his need to have at his disposal different scenographers and collaborators. Max Reinhardt's work allows demonstrated this connection between light and space construction in the sense of dramaturgical composition. His whole career shows how the possibility of flexible and differentiated lighting techniques goes hand in hand with the general diffusion of stage direction. And the images of his Regie Bücher, the book of direction, are very important in this sense, so visual and verbal code. I think that in the context of our discussions of these days, it's interesting to consider Das Mirakel, the miracle, performed at the Olympia Hall in London, 1911. It is an example of the so-called monumental style or Massenregie, mass production. First, we have to consider that collaborations and collaborators have always been of main importance for Reinhardt's work. Technical managers, stage engineers, technicians, architects, a lot of professionals who remain almost unknown and who nevertheless were indispensable to these creations and even to the development of stage design and space and light conception. In this case, they were essential. The direction of the miracle has a long history. We should rather talk of directions as far as everyone has to be seen as an original production. We have only just some one of them, and I put in evidence that the scenographers changed it according to the different production of the miracle. During almost 20 years, it was performed in different places and in different ways. Every time it was a new direction, and the space influenced the choice of other elements. Heinz Herald, he was a dramaturg, publicist, theater manager, director who collaborated with Reinhardt, wrote that the main characteristic of the theater of his age is the willingness to create an image of the world, better to say, its artistic reflection. To this aim, he considers that the dramaturg, the playwright, the actor, the painter, the composer, the musician, they are all necessary, but also the gewaltig fortgeschrittene Technik unserer Zeit, the strong advanced technique of our time. This technique cannot but be an instrument. The main element has to be the spiritual essence of drama. Herald wrote also that the main need of contemporary stage is metamorphosis, and in order to achieve the dynamic of transformation, modern technique is the most indispensable. The relationship between stage lighting and light dramaturgy has not always developed in balance in the history of theater and of set design. For instance, at the moment when electric light began to be used on stage, it was not yet conceived in the best way to be expressive. Several years, even decades, had to pass in order to conceive the proper devices. That is just to say that Reinhardt is one among the artists who want strongly to reduce the distance between technique and dramaturgy, between art and technique. Every new device had to be exploited in an artistic context, and vice versa. Let us think of Svoboda's conception of art and technique in the same way as Svoboda will do some decades after Also, Reinhardt considered the engineers and technicians part of the staffing, part of the ensemble of the theater. Reinhardt is very attentive to the most advanced devices. We find different patents mentioned in these letters. For instance, for Mariano Fortuny, Skydome, or Fuller's Fire Flames, patent by the company Schwabe. We will meet this company again later. This device was employed by Reinhardt in Faust in 1902, and then in huge dimensions for the Miracle. We can synthesize his different modalities of exploiting light, a descriptive way, a light to create atmosphere, the Stimmung, and the dramaturgical use of light. His collaborators in their writings distinguished between Licht und Beleuchtung, light and illumination. Contemporaries wrote that with Salome, by Oscar Wilde, 1903, Reinhardt moves from Bühnenbild to Bühnenraum, to say from B dimension to 3 dimension, so as in the 20s will be recurrent. But the most interesting period, the maturity in the using of light, is according to Heinz Herald, the one of monumental productions. Excuse me. I had a better image of Salome, but it's very slow. Yes. Stopped. Doesn't matter. So the most interesting period for the using of light is, according to Herald, one of monumental productions of the performances he directed in huge space. It would be this specific dimension that allowed to make light become a code, a specific dramaturgical language. In performances like Oedipus, Orestes, Everyman, or The Miracle, Reinhardt could compose with light, organizing the light and shadows according to groups of actors, masses, or according to single actors. He could really orchestrate the material of light in space as the painter does in his painting, and as the musician does, creating a rhythm of light and shadow. The Miracle is a pantomime, a wordless mystery spectacle, composed by Carl von Moller on the basis of Maeterlinck's Beatrice, with the music by Humperdinck. It was performed for the first time in the Olympia Hall, as I told. The Miracle retold an old Middle-Age legend about a nun who runs away from her convent with a knight and subsequently has several adventures out of the convent. During her absence, the statue of the Virgin, the actress Maria Carmi, in the convent's chapel comes to life and takes the nun's place in the convent until he returns. That's the Miracle. Scenography was by Ernst Stern, and the construction of the cathedral by Hermann Dernburg, the architect. Ernst Stern metamorphosed the space of the Olympia Hall into the space of a Gothic cathedral, where there was no more separation between stage and auditorium. The wide space is conceived as a hall. The writer and critic Emil Ludwig wrote, "We were imprisoned in the side aisles. We were spectators on the stage," so there is no more difference between stage, dramaturgical place, and physical place. The central nave of the church matches with the stage where there is the altar. Spectators took place along the side aisles, and the stage could sink of 20 feet. Excuse me. There are some numbers to give the idea of the monumentality of this performance. So the doors of the cathedral, for instance, were 14 meters high and 20 meters large. Sliding platforms, 1,400 extras to the speed of 20 meters per minute, brought inside by a sliding platform, and so on. It's the most glaring example of massenregie, with 2,000 extra, 20,000 spectators. Technology, extras, audience, space, everything is monumental. And monumental can be defined also the lighting because of the huge dimensions of the space, but also as far as the variety of light sources is concerned. There were 53 electricians and 80 technicians. Light appears in its different modalities and always in connection with movement. For example, during the procession, young girls dressed in white, it's already a light, the white color, brought in their hands thousands of candles. Advanced technology in light is here essential to the conception of the performance. Powerful projectors oriented the cones of light that focused and followed the different moments of drama. Some more images. This quality of space needs a very powerful lighting and a differentiated lighting. The powerful light enables to create what we can define a visual montage, as in the cinema. The description of Emil Ludwig underlines the elements of light and shadow, clair-obscur, and the concentration of light on details. So a particular relationship with wide, empty space was obtained. Lighting has also the function to move action from one place to another in the imagination of the audience. 5 interludes represent the life of the nun in the world outside of the convent. To this aim, windows turned dark, spectators lost the illusion to be in the church, scenography presented the scenes in the world outside. Then, thanks to the light changes, spectators come back seated in the side aisles. The Virgin comes back to her chair, the door opens, and the sister returns to the church. In this huge space, it's up to the light to tell the story, to concentrate and orientate the attention of the audience. Cones of light sharp the attention, the attention of the audience. They focus on details like human face or a violent gesture. For the Vienna performance, in a letter to Held of 1912, Reinhardt insists on the importance of lighting devices, on the sky with stars, and above all, on the projector's models. It was, I quote, an extremely important question which role the light plays in our production, and first of all, in such a space. Reinhardt knew well the importance of darkness and shadow as a means of creating contrast. I have different images of different productions of the Miracle. Bertolt Held underlines the importance of mass production in relationship with lighting composition. He compares the light and darkness effect to Rembrandt's painting as far as the capacity to distinguish the way of painting masses and of painting details, and to distribute light and shadow. Reinhardt is absolutely included part of the social, excuse me, I have to show you some more images of these Rembrandt similar composition. We can just say that Reinhardt is absolutely included part of the social, political, economical context of his age. And his productions were very successful. As known, he built an empire. We have to remember that he was connected with big industrial groups like AEG, and that his activity can be seen also in the context of the architecture that reconfigured Berlin at the age of industrialization. As it is known, he was the owner of different theaters in the town. He experimented all different possibilities and styles of his time on all possible typologies of space and architecture, and particularly significant are the relationship with the symbolism and the experience within the expressionist drama, for instance, the Beggar of Sorge. As far as expressionism is concerned, I will not deal with the analysis of other specific performances. I rather mention one experience involving architecture. 1910, Reinhardt directs his famous Oedipus in the Circus Schumann, a circus. The form of this architecture is, of course, not insignificant, connected with the conception of the theater of 5,000 or 10,000 in other projects, for which some years later he charged the expressionist architect Hans Pölzig to renovate the building. We have some images of the first performance in 1910, the Circus Schumann at that age, and then the renovation by Hans Pölzig. I take this example only to show how lighting becomes part of the architecture project. Architecture, in this case, incorporates a very specific and important system of lighting. I show some other project of Pölzig, but also by other architects to show how this project of the 10,000 theater was very important and involved different projects and architects. They were not realized, of course. I see in all these experiences of Max Reinhardt an important moment in relation with two main streams. The one of conceiving the light as the most spiritual element of the stage devices. That's the direction of what I call the mystical side of expressionism between the first decade and the 20s. And the other one is the trend of projection in the theater on stage with its political development and involvement, also within the connection to the cinema. During my investigations about the history of lighting in the theater, I was quite surprised about the amount of publications that dealt with light techniques and about the general awareness of the dramaturgical potential of technique. Most of these publications were conceived as an instrument for theaters that were getting more and more complex in stage organization and thus to answer to different needs of poetics, of dramaturgies. Even in the most technical writings, a deep knowledge of the new principles of stage conception emerges. For instance, the fact that, as Fürst and Hume wrote in 1928, The greater the advance has been in the direction of a suppression of decorative elements in the stage setting, the greater has been the dependence on light for the expression of the atmosphere of the drama, and in general for the realization of the visual idea of the mise-en-scène. We have to notice that the context of this the context of reference is Germany. As Baumann wrote, around the turn of the century, Germany has definitely taken the lead in the field of stage technique and of stage lighting technique also. In this work of 28 by Fürst and Hume, the authors affirm that it's only within the 12 or 15 years that entirely new means of illuminating adapted to meet the needs of the modern stage have been developed. They give references about the most important innovation, Mariano Fortuny, indirect lighting, the 3-color system with red, white, blue, the 4-color system with yellow, and so on, a lot of different devices, the high wattage incandescent lamp, and different transportable devices. And they mentioned all the different models of the different companies with the name Haseit, Schwabe, Hagemann, and so on. And they mentioned also the apparatus to project clouds for projection by Fortuny, for instance. Authors write that these devices, lantern for projections, are useful for the naturalism, for the realistic school, but they have not so great interest for producers of the new advanced type, except in those cases when the projected images can be modified in the direction of stylization. Another important point of discussion is the projection. The author writes that it's necessary to integrate the technique of projection with the three-dimension of scenography and with the presence of the actors. The projected setting has a certain quite spatial, unreal, and fluid character of its own, which distinguishes it from the painted stage decoration. But it's precisely this curious and tangible quality which separates it